length, the crime was not planned to go the way that it went. Sharon Tate was not intended to be there. In fact, it happened because she was there, and that was a surprise to Charles Tex Watson. And the fact that the murder of a Hollywood star is frankly what has created the allure and the glamour of this crime, of that particular crime. Now, what was the motive for the Cielo Drive crime? I'm not going to get into that a great deal because I want to talk about the far lesser known La Bianca murders on this evening. Well, I can say in a very realistic way, after just a few days being back in Los Angeles and Hollywood, there's a few people I'd like to murder. So after 2.5 years of Charlie being here, it's very easy to understand his thinking. Secondly, does it require mind control or hypnosis to encourage murder? And that is something that I completely reject. So, I mean, somebody asked me earlier, but it was all about mind control, right? No matter what the motive was, and I said adamantly not. So I think I need to stress that. Finally, another quote from Charles about the Cielo Drive murder, and this gets to the heart of what the murders were about. And like the quote in which he's saying no one would have been arrested if that broad hadn't been an actor, think about the significance of this that Charles said in 2004 to Crime magazine. You're upset because one of your actors got in the wrong lane doing something with the wrong people, and you want to blame somebody else for it. Now, what would that possibly mean, that one of your actors got caught in the wrong lane doing something with the wrong people? In what way could that possibly have anything to do with starting a race war, being influenced by Beatles lyrics, a copycat murder to free your dear brother Bobby Beausoleil, or any of the many other contrivances and cover-ups and excuses that have been used to explain these murders that your presence here shows obviously still grip the imagination of the world. I'm not going to go into incredible detail about this, as my book explains it more exhaustively, but what it comes down to, what is Charlie talking about? The wrong lane with the wrong people. It's very simple. It doesn't require mind control. It doesn't require the CIA or the Process Church of the Final Judgment or the reptile people or the Illuminati. But try to think about this. Here we are in Los Angeles 50 years later. Would you be shocked to learn that people in the entertainment industry may be using narcotics? Would you be shocked to learn that businesses in Los Angeles could possibly be a front for the distribution of narcotics to wealthy entertainment figures? Could you possibly, in your wildest dreams, imagine that on a Friday night in Los Angeles, a drug deal could be going on a little bit before midnight, right before the party people are going out into Hollywood to celebrate? I'm sure that makes me a crazy conspiracy theorist to even imagine that such a thing might be happening even tonight. But bear with me in this insane theory of mine. The fact is, after 30-something years of researching it, even though there's no doubt that the Cielo Drive murder was partially, and this only on the part, to my belief, Patricia Krenwinkel, and on the second night, the La Bianca murder, Leslie Van Houten. Were those two naive and criminally inexperienced enough to really believe that what they were doing there was a copycat killing to free Bobby Beausoleil. Yes, I believe Patricia Krenwinkel and Van Houten probably believe that. However, after everything that I think happened after that, they couldn't possibly believe it anymore. Those murders happened because Wojtek Frykowski made a deal with Tex Watson and Linda Kasabian to buy a new drug that Wojtek Frykowski was trying to introduce into the Hollywood drug market, and that was MDMA, that we know today as ecstasy. And that, at that time, no one had hardly even heard of it, so it was a coup for a drug dealer, enterprising drug dealer like Wojtek Frykowski, who had not managed to make a hold in the entertainment industry despite the powerful patronage of his high school friend Roman Polanski. Abigail Folger, who was at the end of her rope, no pun intended, with Wojtek's basically leeching off of her, used some of her fortune to finance Frykowski's attempt to get into the MDA business, to corner the market on this new drug that at that time, in the slang of the 60s, as I was told by people who knew about his entrepreneurship, was called fairy dust. That was what MDA was called on the streets at that time. Wojtek Frykowski made a deal with Linda Kasabian, who had been a drug dealer arrested in Boston even before she showed up on the Spahn Ranch, and with Charles Tex Watson, who had formed a partnership in crime based on what she described as a, quote, mind-blowing sexual experience on the day that Linda met Watson at the Spahn Ranch in 1969. On July 4th, the fireworks that were going on there were between Linda and Tex. They formed this very quick criminal partnership, and with $5,000, and I want to keep this on a very pragmatic basis. This is about money, and that is what Hollywood's about, and that's what the drug business is about, and the motives have nothing to do with anything you may have ever heard. It's about, it all began with $5,000 that Linda Kasabian either stole, borrowed, or with the contrivance of a man named Charles Melton and her husband Bob Kasabian. They were saving up for a trip to South America, and she, one way or the other, she took $5,000 from them to give to Tex to manage this major drug deal. They wanted to buy some of the MDA and cocaine that Jay Sebring and Wojtek Frykowski had to begin their own lower level on the narcotics dealing hierarchy business, which is something Tex had been doing even before he met Charlie in 1967. Watson was already engaged in that occupation. So I want to keep it on the grubby, sordid level of ordinary criminals trying to make money, because that's all that is behind the smoke and mirrors that you have been exposed to for half a century. So that $5,000 that is stolen, which is something like 20,000 or more in 2019 currency, it's a huge amount. How much of it was given to Wojtek Frykowski, I cannot determine exactly. Memories are murky, people don't like talking about it in great detail for obvious reasons. From people around Tate and Polanski, what I've gathered is some large amount of that $5,000 that Linda took from her husband went to this deal. And this thing that Charlie called in the trial, in his testimony, this hideous thing, which is how he described the murders, it comes down to that. Now, I have not also been able to determine whether Wojtek Frykowski didn't deliver the MDMA to them, or something I've heard equally credibly from people involved, that what he delivered to them was faulty, or bunk in the language of drug dealers. One way or the other, they didn't fulfill their deal. And I won't go into the whole complicated history, but this is basically what happened with Bobby Beausoleil and Gary Hinman. Is a drug deal that went wrong.
Oh, bad.
This is what happened. Are many of you aware of the name Bernard Crowe? You aware of him?
Yeah.
Exactly. So let's just take a deep breath and look at this. There were other drug deals gone wrong involving the Manson Commune and Charles Tex Watson that you don't know about, that I did learn about, that happened earlier in 1969. That wasn't even the beginning of it. But let's look at this from a bird's eye view, the context of it. Bernard Crowe is a drug dealer. Charles Tex Watson is a drug dealer. He makes a drug deal without going into the complicated mechanics of it. Tex burns Bernard Crowe, who was a fairly well-established syndicate drug dealer to the entertainment industry, and who many actors, musicians, and people in the production world knew very well. So Tex rips off a drug dealer, Bernard Crowe, and that's what led to Charles Manson returning to the apartment house of Rosina Kroner, who was Tex Watson's ex-girlfriend, and shooting him. What was that crime about? It was a drug deal gone wrong. And then we had Bobby Beausoleil and his disagreement with his friend Gary Hinman, who had sold him $1,000 worth of mescaline, that according to the Straight Satans, there was again something bunk about the mescaline that Gary Hinman sold to the middleman, Bobby Beausoleil, and then was given to the Straight Satans for their 10th anniversary celebration. So, you have Bernard Crowe, a drug deal, a drug burn gone wrong. You have Gary Hinman murdered because of a drug deal gone wrong. Do any of you really find it unlikely that, or maybe you find it likely, that in the few weeks from the Crowe and Hinman murder, completely about ordinary criminal motives to do with rival drug dealers, which is happening tonight somewhere, as we well know, suddenly everything changes when it's not the unknown Bernard Crowe and the unknown Gary Hinman. When it's Roman Polanski's house, there can't be any drug dealers in that house. Jay Sebring, who Mr. Tarantino has so realistically portrayed in his recent masterpiece, he couldn't possibly be a drug dealer. Wojtek Frykowski, and this was something that Peter Folger, the father of Abigail Folger, who was an immensely wealthy heiress to the Folger coffee fortune, and a very unknown part of this, he made it absolutely impossible to get information about the crimes. He went out of his way to cover up what happened because he could not have the Folger family name smeared by the fact that his daughter was the financial wherewithal for Wojtek Frykowski to buy the drugs that made this slaughter happen. So is it really that hard to believe that a group, a commune, a very ordinary commune that could be compared to hundreds of others at the time, that two of the people involved get involved in drug deals that go wrong, and then suddenly, though, on August 8th, 1969, that commune's belief system has changed completely, and it's all about Beatle lyrics, interpretations, wanting to start a race war, freeing their friend. Suddenly it's that, and of course, again, let's look at the two crimes that you mostly know of before that. Were they crimes between strangers, Or were they crimes between people that knew each other? And this is the heart of what Hollywood and the entertainment industry is still lying about you today. And again, in reference, just to be topical, to the aforementioned masterpiece by Mr. Tarantino, which he presents innocent, lovely, delightful strangers, the epitome of 60s innocence and psychedelic splendor, who could have been mowed down by these evil cult of dangerous hippies. So just look at the logic of that and think about it. And ask yourself, is it really hard to believe that the Cielo Drive murders were in fact exactly what happened with Gary Hinman and with Bernard Crowe, except Hollywood cannot allow that to happen to honey blonde Sharon Tate and her usually nameless house guests. So that is the Cielo Drive murder. Now I want to briefly refer, because I think magically you have to look at the significance of names and their symbolism. When Danny Fuentes invited me to come here to show the film and to speak to you, I noted that his company is called Lethal Amounts. Well, what is this crime spree about is literally lethal amounts of drugs. Secondly, he titled this excellent exhibition that he presented at the Lethal Amounts Gallery, and this event tonight, in general, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, in 1969, a takeoff on Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So I cannot possibly convey everything I've learned about Hollywood's corruption and their dedicated effort to this very day to prevent you from knowing what really happened. But let's just take a few. How many of you have seen Tarantino's film? Could you raise your hands? Good. Okay, so you will generally know these are rather obscure details, but I have to preface them by saying I can tell you it's impossible to be at the elite level of the film industry that Quentin Tarantino is, as the protege of the charming and wonderful Harvey Weinstein, as the defender of Roman Polanski's rape of Samantha Guimard, which Mr. Tarantino referred to as she was down with it. So nobody in that position that Tarantino is in does not know the same open secret. If I've learned it from people in the entertainment industry in 1969, there's no way he doesn't know the basic essence of the truth. Furthermore, I know that he happens to have worked in a professional basis, Tarantino, with a fairly well-known Manson aficionado who worked with him on the film with Oliver Stone, whatever that piece of shit was called, Natural Born Killers. So I know I absolutely can tell you, he is well-versed to a certain degree in what went on. So the film he presented is a candy-coated lie. It's propaganda for Hollywood, and whether you enjoy or don't his postmodern efforts to make homages to his favorite film and show his favorite actress's feet, whatever you think of his aesthetics, that's what we have to see it. From the point of view of someone who knows what really happened, it is a sugar-coated lie. So let me just name a few details, and you can think about it yourself, and if you haven't seen it. Steve McQueen is a character very briefly conveyed in Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Steve McQueen is presented in a party scene where he's watching Sebring and Tate dancing, apparently an outtake from Austin Powers. How that got into that film, I don't know. And McQueen comments basically that, he never had a chance with Sharon because this other actress says Sharon Tate has a type, that she only likes talented little men that look like 12-year-old boys, meaning Polanski and Sebring. And McQueen says, as if he's a high school kid pining after the unattainable cheerleader, I never had a chance. The reality of the lifestyle that Roman Polanski, Sharon Tate, Steve McQueen, Jay Sebring were leading, and this is not vicious gossip of the Kenneth Anger level, this is something many people who knew them told me and had no problem with, because that was the 60s, that was a sexual revolution. Steve McQueen knew Sharon Tate and was her lover years before, and Sebring and McQueen had threesomes using LSD with Sharon Tate many times. It's not a rumor, it's a fact. But Tarantino twists it around and presents it more wholesomely. Now, I'm not judging sexual promiscuity by any means. Not in the least. I'm not making a moral judgment. I'm trying to tell you how, just as Vincent Bugliosi carefully presented all of the victims of the crimes as paragons of innocence, upstanding citizens, maybe future presidents and Nobel Prize winners, which is normal prosecutorial method. You don't say anything that could be perceived as negative about the victims of a crime. So what Tarantino does is retell history there. But what else is there about Steve McQueen? Steve McQueen was one of Jay Sebring's main cocaine clients, as well as one of his main hairdressing clients. A lot of people will say, but how could Jay Sebring be a drug dealer? He was running this huge men's hairstyling empire. That was a front for the main source of Sebring's money. And Sebring, by the way, according to his bank accounts, was constantly in need of money. He was not making a huge amount through haircuts. He was making it with the little extras that he brought to the film sets and to his celebrity clients. Steve McQueen, the night after the Cielo crime murders, knew about it even before it was mentioned in the newspapers at all. And in the early morning of August 9th, was seen driving up and down to Easton Drive to a house on Rimmel, which is where Jay Sebring's villa was. Why? Because according to Amos Russell, the butler of Jay Sebring, women were being sent to Jay Sebring's house to remove mysterious packages, and that they were panicked. This was before anyone knew about the murder publicly. Steve McQueen supervised and arranged getting Jay's stash, his friend Jay's stash, out of the Easton Drive villa. And he did that successfully. So by the time the police arrived, there was no proof that Jay Sebring was a major narcotics trafficker. Now, that would be a more interesting film for little Quentin to entertain you with, but it's not the one he chose to tell. So I'll end this Tarantino bashing session with, I will. Just one more. Yeah, it is a fairy tale. Yeah. Yes, it is. Right. In the very worst way. Right. Right. Okay. It is? Okay. That's not about me at all. No. Anyway, it's a fairy tale in the most sinister way. It is meant to lull you into being good little children, into believing basically the same lie Vincent Bugliosi and the powers behind him sold you 50 years ago. So briefly, other figures that Tarantino shows in the film that shows me he knows what he's doing. It's not an innocent entertainment. Mama Cass is shown in a brief scene at the Playboy Mansion with her fellow mama in the Mamas and the Papas, Michelle Phillips. So we show Steve McQueen, and then we see the Playboy Mansion. Let's break this down. Hugh Hefner was a very, very close friend of Roman Polanski, and Tate, his right-hand man, a guy named Victor Lowndes, was the boyfriend of Playmate of the Month in August 1969, Connie Kresge. According to a friend of Connie Kresge, the last time I was here in Los Angeles, he said that Connie Kresge was aware that Polanski and Victor Lowndes spent a fortune collecting what she called fame porn. In other words, Hefner and Lowndes bought up like a picture of Joan Crawford dancing naked, Marilyn Monroe giving a blowjob. Whatever they could find, they would spend top dollar